Hello, welcome to section 3, part 5 of building a web application using ASP.NET Core 1.0, Aurelia, TypeScript, and Webpack in Visual Studio Code. Let us wrap up contact list view by adding, delete, and create contact functionalities in this section. Then we'll build the common UI components like dialog box, progress bar, notification, date picker. Then we'll talk about building the contact detail form, which is the right-hand side pane of the application. What are Aurelia value converters and how we can use them in the view and view model. Communication between the list and detail views via messages using the pub sub pattern. Okay, now let us start adding the methods that are required for delete and create functionalities in the view model. And then we'll add the user interface as well, remove and add contact buttons in the view. Okay, here's a simple create method and a delete method. Like I said in the last part, we're only going to be using a simple service that is going to be an in-memory contact service. So in the create method, all that we're doing is we're taking the contact as an argument, and then we're going to push the created contact that is being passed to the view model using a binding syntax. We'll talk about it when we go to the view. I'll explain how do we get the value for this created contact. Then what we do is, here's an interesting line. After we add the contact, we want to set the current selection, that is the selected ID, to the just created contact ID. And then we redirect that to a route that starts with contact slash and the name of the selected ID. For example, in our sample application, I had 4 contacts, which means that they started with 0 index and then they went up to 3. So when you create a new contact, naturally there'll be number 4. So this route becomes contact slash 4. But we will not be talking about the contact details yet, because we're only going to be focusing on the list view side of it. So we're going to talk about the left pane, and then here we are going to have 2 buttons, and the add contact button is going to call this create method, and it's going to just add the whatever is inputted in the detail form. It's going to push to this created contact property in the view model, and then it's going to set the selected ID, and then it's going to navigate out. Okay, then delete. What does delete take? Delete takes the ID of the contact, like you must have guessed by now, because we are clicking on each of the contacts on the left to bring that as an active or selected ID, right? So when you click on one of the contacts, and then if you click on the delete or remove contact button, it's going to pass the selected ID of that contact. And what we're doing is we're going to delegate that into the delete method of the contact service that takes the ID, which is going to simply go use the filter method on the array to check if the contact ID equals, which is the value equals for the passed ID. And then once it finds, it's going to just delete it, and then it's going to give a response. So what we're doing here in this line is we are going to get the contacts again because we just deleted one. We can optimize this in many ways, but what I wanted to do is I want to make it simple. So as soon as the contact is deleted, there is one item gone from the array. So it makes total sense to fetch the contacts again. So we'll get a new array. So that's what we are doing here. And then I am just navigating into the default route. And I set the selected ID to 0. You can do some optimizations. For example, if you are, let's say you have 4 contacts, and if you're in the second contact, and when we call the delete method, what we could do is you could check if there is any item after that in the array. If so, then make that as the selected ID. But those are all little things that you can do. The purpose of this exercise is to show you how you can create delete methods, and then how we can connect them to the contact list view. So then let's see how does the view look. We've already built the view. If you remember, in the last section we had a search bar at the top, and then we had a list of contacts at the bottom. So in between them we introduce another div. This is all standard Bootstrap stuff. So what we do is we're introducing two buttons, and then we're using the delegate call click.delegate, and we're calling the delete, and then we're passing the selected ID in the view model as an argument to itself. So, and what we've done next is an interesting bind call on the disable HTML property. So disable.bind equals selected ID equals 0. So for example, the reason why we've done this is like you don't want people to be clicking on the remove contact button when there is no actively selected contact. So we always check if the selected ID it has some value, and if it has some value, then we enable it. If not, then we disable it. So looking at this expression, let's go back and see the code. Maybe I started with 1 instead of 0. Otherwise, this will have to go to a negative number, selected ID less than 0 or something like that. So it's the idea is when this expression is true, this button will be disabled. That's all. And then the next button is going to call the create function. So click.delegate create. So that means when this button is clicked, this will go to the delegate. This will delegate to the create method. And the create method we just saw in the previous slide. It's going to just create a new contact. And when it is first created, it'll all be empty values. And then the user has to enter all those values in the detail form. And then he can click a save button, obviously, which is going to be on the right pane. We'll talk about that towards the end of this section about how to create the contact detail form. So then we'll understand how the create method is, when the create method is fired, how does it communicate to the detail view, and how does the detail view render an empty form with no values or default values. Okay, so now let's jump into Visual Studio Code, and then we'll build these two missing functionalities, which is delete and add contact. Let me switch to Visual Studio Code, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to maximize that. And like I said, we've already downloaded the completed application. So I'm going to bring the required code from the completed application. So let me go first fill the view model with those two missing methods. So I am going to select those methods, and let us jump into the contact list.ts, which is the view model. Okay, so in the last section, we talked about the created hook. That's where we fetch all the contacts, and then we also talked about the search and the select method, which was used to select the active or the clicked on contact will be selected as the selected contact. So now let's add these two methods at the bottom. So one is the create method. We already talked about it in the previous slide, and then the delete method, which is going to be the it's going to call the delete map function and then reload the contacts. Okay, so let us save this, and then what we'll do is we're going to go to the view and add those buttons. Let me go into the view. Let me close the unwanted tabs so it's easier for us. So I'm going to select that div, and I'm going to put it in between the search bar and the list of contacts. Okay, so now that we've got everything, we got the list straightened up. What we're going to do is we're going to just call the npm start so we can launch it. So first we need to launch the backend, which is going to be running on port 5000, and then we'll launch the client-side application, which the Webpack dev server is going to serve on port 9000. Okay, so let us wait for the backend to launch. It is launched. I'm going to bring that tab to this screen and then dock it to the left. Okay, so the backend is ready. Let's wait for this to bundle and then give me an OK, so we can go hit localhost 9000. And let's keep the debugger or developer tools open, so in case if there's any errors, we can go ahead and fix it. Okay, the bundle is now valid, so I'm gonna hit. You can ignore those two warnings for now. Okay, so now we're seeing the buttons remove contact and new contact. As you can see, let me close this guy so we can see them side by side, or we can maximize it so you can see them side by side. This is the left pane and this is the right pane. Because I don't have any selected contacts, my remove contact button is disabled. As soon as I select one, see, it's gotten, it is enabled. That is happening because of this line where we said disable.bind equals selected ID equals 0. Let me go and take a look at the service, because I think we talked about whether it is 0 based or 1 based. We can easily figure that out by going into the service and then see what my get ID is being called. Okay, so here I go. Because I used plus ID, even though I started initialize with 0, the first get ID itself will make it 1. So which means it's not 0 based, our IDs are 1 based. So no wonder why when there is no selection, I initialized my contact list selected ID equals 0, which means that that expression will be true, which will disable the button. Okay, so if you keep on clicking that, ideally what we want to do is every time I click on the contact, I would like a nice form to show up on this side, and it'll have the first name, last name, and it'll show a nice calendar control to pick the birth date and so on, which will continue in towards the end. We'll have that UI built, but for now, let's focus on the remove contact. Okay, so let me click on remove contact and see if that disappears and then the list gets reloaded. Okay, there you go. So now we used to have 3 contacts. As soon as I delete it, we only have 2, and then again I can delete it. But since it's all in-memory repository, when you refresh it, you will get everything back, because it calls the service in-memory service again, and then that gets initialized with these 4 contacts. When we actually wire it to the real backend, it'll all be coming from a server-side web API, which will apparently be either served from in-memory. That's the first step we'll do, and then eventually they'll either be talking to a SQL server or RDBMS data store or a NoSQL data store. So when you delete it, it'll really get deleted, and then when you create a contact, it'll actually be created in the actual data store in the backend. Okay, so I am not going to do the new contact now, because when I click on new contact, I'll get an error because I don't have a proper route. Because if you look at the end of the create method, what I've done is I am trying to route, that is router.navigate, to a URL that starts with contact slash and a segment, which is nothing but the ID of the just created contact. But that route doesn't exist yet, because if you go into our index.ts, if you remember, I just commented out that route, which is what is going to be used by the detail, that is the contact detail screen. We are not yet wiring it, so that's why I don't want to wire the add new contact button yet. Okay, now let us focus on what are some of the common user interface components, and then how we are going to create them. So we'll go into each and every one of the common component, and then we'll create them so that we can use them in our mini spas. We're going to build 2 mini spas. One is the contact manager, another one is the task manager. So we'll use these common components in both of them. So let us go back into our presentation, and then we'll see what is the first common component. The first one in the list is Aurelia dialog. In all modern applications, you need some form of dialog box where you could show some messages and get some user feedback. It could be yes, no, cancel, or it could even be a full-blown data entry form that can be rendered within the dialog box. So Aurelia dialog is a plugin. Why is it called a plugin? What is it? How is it different from feature and global resources? The main difference between the plugin and feature slash global resources is the feature and global resources that we discussed in the last section. They are all part of our application. That means you develop it. It is internal to the project. Whereas a plugin is an external dependency to the project. So it could be either from Aurelia.io, which is Aurelia, the company that builds some plugins for us, or it could be somebody else, some third party. Even you could build your own plugin and you can publish it in GitHub. So somebody else could download your plugin and they could use it in their application as well. So that's the logic. So If it's internal to the application, it is a feature or global resources. If it is external to the application, then it is called a plugin. And how do you install a plugin? Same way, we use the npm install command, and then since we are using TypeScript, we're going to bring the type definitions using the typings tool. So let's start installing the Aurelia dialog and then followed by the typings. Then after we get both of them installed, we have to wire it to our application in main.ts. So what we'll do is we'll call the aurelia.use.plugin and the name of the plugin. If you remember, the feature was also wired in the same location using the same API call. There we said aurelia.use.feature. Here we're going to call aurelia.use.plugin. That's all. So now let us go ahead and install the Aurelia dialog plugin. Let me go into my commander and then I'll install them. I'll go to the other tab and then we'll start installing it. Okay, so I'm going to do npm install Aurelia dialog -- save. And then after that is completed, I'm going to install the typings for Aurelia. Okay, now we'll install the typings by typing typings install github:/aurelia/dialog. In this case, we're getting the typings from the GitHub because this is a Aurelia Teams plugin. So they maintain the d.ts in GitHub. And when you use the -- save, it's going to save all the typing definitions into typings.json. So whoever gets it, if they just type typings install, it'll read read all the typings that we installed from the JSON file, and it'll install them correctly. Now let us switch to main.ts, and then we'll add aurelia.use.plugin Aurelia dialog, which is the name of the plugin. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and then we'll go into main.ts, and we're going to add the plugin command .plugin Aurelia dialog. Just add it right above the feature. It doesn't. I think the order doesn't matter. You can either put it before feature or after feature. So as long as it is called, it is going to load the plugin. But loading the plugin doesn't mean that it is going to be invoked. You need to call the actual methods to show the dialog box on the screen, and then once the user gives some input and whether he cancels or if he clicks OK button, then the result is going to be returned to the caller of your application. In our case, the caller is going to be the contact detail form, which we haven't built yet. Okay, so like I said, just because we imported the plugin doesn't mean that it's going to magically show up. We need to build the view model and the view, which is also called as a component that we want to render inside the dialog box. So under resources, I went ahead and created a folder called dialogs, which is empty right now, and I'm going to create a view model and a view. So I'm going to call my view model message-box.ts, which is going to be my view model, and then I'm going to have a message-box.html, which is going to be my view. Okay, so before we go ahead and copy the finished source code, I just wanted to explain the source code. So let me go back into the presentation. So if you look at it, the view model at first is importing the dialog controller, because that's what we need. So we need the dialog controller. So we'll get that dialog controller first, and then we'll inject it using the @inject decorator. As you know, it'll automatically inject it into the controller, into the constructor as a first parameter. And then in here, what we're doing is we're configuring some settings. All that I'm interested in is one of the property called center horizontal only, which is set to true. Normally, if you don't specify that, it's going to center both vertically and horizontally, but I'm interested in only centering horizontal at the top. So I just wanted to change this property. And activate is a component lifecycle method, and this will be invoked when we actually call the dialog box. When you open the dialog box, it will be called with the parameter message. as you can see, we have two properties called message and answer. The message is what we're going to show inside the dialog box. Like for example, you modified your contact. Are you sure you want to leave this page? And then there will be command buttons that will say stay or leave. And then based on the selection, the result, we could make our OK method in the controller return anything we want. So that's what we're going to assign it to the answer. So now let us pay attention into the view. As you can see, the view uses some custom HTML elements: AI-dialog, AI-dialog-body, AI-dialog-footer. So the body is going to just show the message. So whatever the message we pass, and that message is what is going to be displayed using the string interpolation syntax. And then we have two buttons. They are labeled as stay and leave. The stay method is going to call the dialog controller's cancel function, and then the leave button is going to call the OK function with whatever message we displayed as return value. So it's kind of like very this is for demonstration, so usually we don't do this. Whatever the message we show is what is being returned when you're closing the dialog box back into the caller. Okay, so now let's go back to Visual Studio Code and then implement this view model and view. We already created some empty files, so I'm going to close everything but them. So I'm going to copy the message box source code. So let me go ahead and bring the message box source code. The first one is going to be our view model, and we already talked about it in the slide, so I'm not going to go over it again. And the view is also a simple HTML markup which uses the AI-dialog star tags, which are the custom dialog tags. Okay, so that is how we build a dialog box using Aurelia's dialog plugin. We're not going to invoke it yet, which we will invoke when we build the contact detail form after the user touches any of the fields, and if it tries to navigate away to another contact, that's when we'll fire this dialog box and ask them, hey, you modified something, are you sure you want to leave this page? Until then, just let's focus on the next common component that we want to build. But before we move, what we want to do is, since we are putting all of these inside the resources and there is an index.ts file, and if you remember, we have a method called config.globalResources that is an array that takes an array parameter where you have to mention all those resources that we wanted to use throughout the application. So here I built a dialog box which is under the dialogs folder. I'm using a // because it's in the same folder. /dialogs, and then the name of the component is message-box, and that's it. So now we'll move into the next common component, which is an interesting component called progress bar. If you noticed in YouTube or GitHub, right down below the address bar, you'll see a nice progress bar that goes all the way from the left side of the browser all the way to the right end, and that's usually that usually happens while the page is being loaded. When the page is done, that progress bar will complete, and there is a cool JavaScript library called NProgress. This library doesn't understand the new module syntax. So there are two ways you could bring the legacy components or the components that are not aware of the JavaScript module loaders. The first way would be the traditional script source equals the path of the JavaScript file, and the link rel equals the path of the style sheet. That's how we used to program all these years. But since we are using Webpack and we are using the modern the TypeScript transpiler, we don't have to do that. If we can use the type definition, and the type definition can put a module wrapper, then we can still use the import syntax to import both our JavaScript and the CSS. So let us take a look at how we're going to bring this component. The same way, you do the npm install first and the name of the library --save, and then you get the type definitions. But this time, if you notice it, I'm using a different syntax, dt followed by a tilde symbol. DT means definitely typed. That is the GitHub repository. The person who maintains that repository has a lot of TypeScript type definitions for popular JavaScript libraries, and then the community also contributes a lot of them. So there used to be a different tool before typings, and now typings is replacing that old tool. So even though the tool is new, the tool still leverages all the hard work done in the definitely typed GitHub repository. So you do the typings install, and then you specify DT tilde to indicate that, hey, for this library, go and fetch the TypeScript definition from definitely typed GitHub page. And then dash dash global will save it in the global area in the under the typings folder, and then dash dash save will save it in the typings.json. So if you flip into our project, you can see that there is a typings folder. Underneath that there's a globals. That's where it's going to store all the type definitions. Okay, so now let's go ahead and install the NProgress packages. npm install NProgress dash dash save, and then what we want to do is we want to next install the typings of that. So I'm going to have the command handy. As soon as this is done, I'm going to paste the command and then hit enter. After that, we will have to import the style sheet, because even though this is a JavaScript library, the progress bar still requires a CSS to show that nice blue progress bar down below the address bar. Okay, so now the package is installed. Now let's install the typings. Then we'll jump into the main.ts, and then we'll import that CSS file. Okay, so let's go to main.ts, and then under the Bootstrap checkbox, we'll import the inprogress / nprogress.css. If you notice that I didn't give the / node underscore modules / nprogress, because by default when you don't give that the / and if you just specify the path, it will look into the node underscore modules as well. Since when you do npm install, this library gets installed under node underscore modules, you don't have to explicitly specify. If you notice that, that's what we did in line number 4 and 5 when we imported Font Awesome and Bootstrap, because those are installed by npm as well, which means that they're also in the node underscore modules folder. Okay, so now that we got the NProgress library installed and also the CSS imported, let us create a custom element that will give that effect of loading the progress bar that goes from the left side to the right side. Okay, so now we're going to go into the same resources folder. Underneath that, we have an elements empty folder. That's where I want to create my loading indicator component, or custom element. Loading-indicator.ts, and let us copy the source code from the completed project. I can explain this in the PowerPoint slide, which I've already put together. So the NProgress library is installed. Now we're going to build the custom element named loading indicator. Like I said, there are some conventions. You could say loading indicator custom element, but we've talked about it many times. In Aurelia, everything is a component. If you don't give any convention, by default it is going to treat that as a custom element. But I said that NProgress handles the rendering of the view by itself. So we need to let Aurelia know that, hey, I am only going to define view model, so don't even bother looking for a view. That can easily be done using the @noViewDecorator. decorator. Okay, so that's what we're importing. We are importing two decorators. One is called bindable, the other one is called no view. And the first line is simply the import for NProgress. When you say import star, that means import everything in this module. In this case, there's going to be only one global function called one global object called NProgress. So that's why we're using the alias import star as NProgress. That'll allow us to access the NProgress library using this NProgress variable. Okay, so then we decorate our view model with @noView to indicate Aurelia that this is a view model only component, and let it take care of rendering the view. So don't look for a view HTML or anything else. Then how do I start my progress and how do I stop my progress? So I'm going to declare a custom bindable property, and the name of the property is loading. And again, Aurelia uses convention. The property name followed by changed will trigger when there is a change in the value of that property. It takes a new argument. It takes a new argument called new value, and we are checking if that is true. Then start the progress bar. Otherwise, it is done. Stop the progress bar. Okay, so this is how we define our view model only custom element. If you noticed it, we've seen two variations. In the previous section, we saw an HTML only component or custom element that was used for nav bar. Now we are seeing the view model only custom element which only has a view model but no view. So we've seen two variations. Then finally, what we need to do is after we define the custom element, we need to use it in our shell.html. That's the ideal place to show the progress bar because that's where we are wiring the navigation bar, right? So we call it by loading on dash indicator. As you know, the Pascal case becomes a kebab case, and then the loading is the bindable property. So we say loading dot bind, and what we are doing is we are binding it to the router dot is navigating property. This property is injected is bound from the shell.html from the shell's view model. The router is navigating will be true when it is loading a route. After the route is loaded, it will be false. So as long as the route is navigating still, it is going to be true. So it means the new value will be true and the progress bar will start showing from left to right. As soon as it becomes false, it'll call done. So the progress bar will stop. So that is how this custom component is built, and then it's leveraged in shell.html. Okay, now that we've seen how it works, let's go back and look at the actually create the code and add them into index.ts, because if you remember, every time we add a new component, make sure to add them into the global resources so they automatically become part of the feature which we have already wired using Aurelia.use, and the name of the feature in our case is resources. So here it is in elements folder, and the name of the component is loading dash indicator. Okay, so that wires the loading indicator. Unlike the dialog box which we haven't used, we're going to use the loading indicator so we can see the progress on the screen. Okay, so let's go into our shell.html, and in here we're going to add that custom element, and I'm going to use the emmet syntax. So loading dash indicator, and it has one custom property called loading dot bind, and then we're going to bind this to router dot is navigating, and that's pretty much it. So if you see that I haven't saved anything, so the hot refresh is not going to happen. As soon as I save all three of them, it's going to start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this and quickly go back to the browser so we can see that progress bar in action. Boom, you saw that blue progress bar at the top. So let's go, and one more time, let's refresh it. Okay, so it's very fast. So as long as the route is navigating, you'll see the progress bar. Okay, I'm clicking it a few times so I can see the blue progress bar. Okay, cool. So that is our second component. What is the next component that we're going to build? Let's go take a look at that. Notifications. Interesting. So Toaster is a library that's used to show notifications like success, error, warning, info, and so on. This is a cool component. So the same way, we'll install them using the npm command, followed by the typings command to bring the typings. Then we'll import the CSS, and finally we'll make a call to the success method or any method, any of those four methods that we want with a message, and it's going to show. Success message is going to be in green. I think warning will be yellow, error is red, and info is I think it's turquoise blue. So those are the standard colors. Okay, so now let's go ahead and bring Toaster into our application. Okay, the same way I'm going to copy and paste the commands, npm commands. npm install toaster dash dash save, and then followed by the typings command. If you notice that there is a pattern to bringing the external libraries into our application. The same with NProgress. What we did was we just brought the library, then we brought the typings for TypeScript, then we imported the CSS, and then eventually we started importing the actual object, or import using the import star syntax, and then we give an alias and then call the API. So it's that simple. Okay, so I'm going to call the typings command now. Okay, so as soon as the typings command is done, we are going to, oh, I have dash save. It has to be dash dash save. Okay. Okay, so now that we've brought everything, we want to import the CSS in main.ts. Let's go into main.ts and import that toaster.css. This folder structure is slightly different because every vendor is different. Usually they have the dist folder, Toaster has a build folder, NProgress is in the NProgress folder, so that's why you have to be careful about the path. If you don't give the correct path, you'll notice it because your UI won't show up, or it'll show some, it'll show without the colors and stuff. You'll know that there is some problem with the style sheet path because the UI won't look good. Okay, so that is toaster library. Now that we brought everything, let us make a call into toaster in one of our components. The best place for that would be the contact list component. Okay, so in here, what we'll do is we'll import the toaster library first. So it's going to be the same syntax. I think import star as toaster from toaster. And then we're going to use the toaster in our get all callback. Once the promise returns, after we assign the context array into our property in this dot context, we're going to call the toaster.success method, and we're just going to say contact list is loaded successfully. Okay, so let us save this and let's go back into our UI, and once it's refreshed, and it's going to show the contact list is loaded successfully. Okay, so we have wired 3 UI components so far, and the last one is going to be very important for us because when you click on this one of these contacts in the list, we're going to show the contact list view on the right side over here in this area. When we show that, we have a few properties which you already looked at. There's like an ID, first name, last name, email, then there's a birth date property. So the birth date property, we really don't want to show a text box. Instead, we want some cool calendar control, and then we should be able to select one of the date, or we can select the month and year as well. As soon as you pick it, then we will have a text box that will only show it. So technically in the text box, you won't be able to edit it. You will only be, as soon as you click on the text box, you will show the calendar, and then you will let the user select the date, because this is one of the fields that people can make many errors. You will add some validation later in the next part. We are going to talk about the Aurelia validation plugin. But for now, avoid as much as possible when there is a fields of type date or time. It's always better to show the choice to the user rather than letting them type and screw up, because people might put a dash slash and they don't know what time zone they are in. So you do not want them to make mistakes. Let the user interface present a nice calendar and let them select it. So my choice for the calendar control is Telerik Kendo calendar control, but Telerik Kendo is a very big library. Luckily, there is a great UI toolkit team in Aurelia. They have put together an Aurelia Kendo bridge UI toolkit, which I'll cover in the next part of the series. But for this part, what I'll do is I will bring the Bootstrap date picker, and then I'll show how to wire that. That is also pretty good and it has some decent functionality. But Kendo calendar control is much better because Kendo Telerik has two versions. One is a core version. They call it core. It used to be called as open source version. Actually, it's funny. When they started out, it was all open source, and then eventually that was acquired by another company, and then they decided that they are not going to give their powerful line of business controls like tree, grid, list view, the bar chart controls, and all the stuff. They just put them in the pro version, and they have given the rest of the stuff in the core, which is the open source version. So luckily the calendar control is in the open source version, so we'll see how we can use that in the next part. Now let's focus on how to bring the last component, which is the Bootstrap date picker component. It's the same way we'll bring it. We'll do the npm install, we'll do the typings install, then we'll bring the date picker CSS. But the date picker is actually the Bootstrap library itself is built. Some of the JavaScript functionalities are built using the jQuery plugins or jQuery extensions. So, which means that it has a dependency on jQuery. Luckily, the Aurelia skeleton Webpack TypeScript project has taken care of bringing jQuery for us. But then we should bring the jQuery's type definitions so we don't get any issues, because we will be using that dollar. The dollar symbol is the popular symbol that's used for the dollar is the variable for jQuery. So we'll use a dollar dot date picker extension method or plugin method. That's what we're going to use to show the date picker on screen, and we'll also call some custom functions built in the date picker plugin. So what we'll do is we'll bring this third-party library and we'll write a custom element called date picker, and as you know, it's going to be displayed as date dash picker as a custom tag. Okay, so let us start installing the Bootstrap date picker library and the typings right now. Okay, so npm install bootstrap dash date picker dash dash save. Then we need the typings. Again, we know the pattern already. The third one will be the importing the CSS file required for the third-party library in main.js. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen and then paste that next command, and I'll have the import command handy so I can copy and paste it inside of main.js. Let's not watch it install. Okay, after that command is done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install type. I think by mistake I ran the npm install more than once. It doesn't matter. You can run it any number of times. Okay, now the typings is done. So let me go ahead and wire the CSS in main.js. If you notice it, this has a different path. It has a distribution folder, dist, and then there's a CSS, and within that we want to pick the date picker 3. That is the proper CSS for the Bootstrap date picker. Okay, so that's what we've done. We have imported the CSS. Now, before we start creating our date picker component, what I'd like to do is I would like to take a moment and install Moment.js, which is a powerful date time processing library, which is very, very useful for us when you want to manipulate date time strings, convert them to UTC, format them using, mmddyy or dd-mm-yy. There are so many helper methods, and Moment.js is a very, very powerful library. So let's install that right away. And one of the things that you don't have to do, luckily, is you do not have to run the typings command, because Moment.js is the latest and greatest library that supports module out of the box. So it does come with a TypeScript definition. These days, all the modern libraries like Aurelia, AngularJS, there are many libraries. They don't make you go and download the TypeScript definition explicitly. Instead, they ship the TypeScript definition along with their library. So when you install Moment, the moment.d.ts TypeScript definition also gets bundled in their distribution folder. So you don't have to do that. But there's one little caveat. If you want to use the syntax like import the name of the library from the module syntax, you'll have to add this allow synthetic default imports flag in your tsconfig.json, which is a very simple setting. This tsconfig, as you remember, is a TypeScript config file. This is, I think we talked about it in the part 1 of the tutorial. Okay, now let's go into our tsconfig.json and add that line that will automatically bring the um, the default imports. So I'm going to go here, and it has IntelliSense. So as soon as I type, that's the first setting, allow synthetic default imports equals true. If you don't do that, then if you use the command import the name of the library, which is moment from moment, then it will give a compiler error, because if you want to use that syntax, you have to enable this flag. So I just want to show a variation of importing a module. Okay, so with that said, let's go and start building our date picker custom element. We'll go into the elements folder, and then we'll create the view and the view model. As the name indicates, it's going to be date-picker.ts, and then the view is going to be date-picker.html. Okay, so the date picker, I am going to bring the source code from the completed application and paste it here, and I'll explain them using my PowerPoint slide. But first, let me copy the view as well. Okay, so now let's go into the slide, and then we'll talk about the source code. Okay, I'm going to highlight the sections that are interesting for us. Okay, the first thing, as always, we'll import inject custom element, which is the another decorator that we want to use. If you noticed, all along we never had a need to use this, because by convention, whatever is the name of the class, Aurelia is going to automatically turn that into a kebab case. But in this case, I just want to show another variation of how you can explicitly define whatever you want. It doesn't have to be date-picker. You could call it d-p as well, whatever name you want. And then we already know what is bindable. Then we import the Bootstrap date picker component. Then this is import moment from moment. This is the reason why, if you want to use this type of a syntax, you have to use the allow synthetic default imports in tsconfig. Okay, so the first 3 lines are just bringing the modules. Then the next 2 lines are decorations, which you already are aware of. But this inject is a very interesting constructor injection. We are bringing a class, an object of type element. What does it mean? For example, if you declare date dash picker, for example, if you, I'm going to type it here. If you do this date dash picker, and you use some parameters, and then you just close this date dash picker, how do I get a reference to this DOM element? There is a way in custom element. That is what this element class is all about. So if you define a custom element, the DOM element represented by that custom element will be injected using this element inject. And as always, that will go as the parameter into the constructor, which will store it into a property called element. Okay, so then this line is very straightforward. You declare your view model, and then we declare 2 bindable properties, the value property and the format property. As you might have guessed by now, the value is the value that we select. That could be any date, and if no format is being passed from the view, it's going to automatically default to mm/dd/yyyy, which is the format used in North America and Canada as well. Okay, so that is the bindable properties. Let's jump into the actual attached lifecycle event. Attached is when your custom element is attached to the DOM. That's when this callback is invoked. So in here, what we're doing is we are getting the actual DOM element using this inject command, which is stored in the element property, and we use the jQuery selector. jQuery selector can take it can take any parameter like a string parameter or an object. The string parameter will be either an ID with a pound sign, which is the ID of the element, or it'll be a class selector like using dot and the name of the class. In this case, we already know the DOM element, so that the dollar function can also take an object which is of type DOM element. So we select the DOM element, which is the parent element, which is the date dash picker element, and then underneath that we're using the jQuery's find method to find any element with the class dot date picker, which is going to be any date picker that you define will automatically have the class dot date picker. And then we're calling the jQuery plugin, which is added by Bootstrap, and that method is called date picker, and it takes so many parameters. As you can guess, this is a format parameter. The start date is from which how far back can you go when you're using the back in the year. There are some navigation controls in the calendar control, so how far back can you go. And auto closes when you move away. When you click away, it'll close by itself. And the today button is a special button which will show at the bottom, so when you click on that, you don't have to navigate what is my date today. It'll automatically pick current date. And then show on focus, I specifically set it to false because I had some issues binding this control. So I turned it off, which means that when you're using a tab or when you click on that text box, immediately as soon as the text box gets the focus, it'll show the calendar control. But I want to stop it because I'm explicitly calling that on click event. So as you can see, I'm using the chaining because the find will return another jQuery object, and jQuery has on method, so you can cascade any number of methods you want in JavaScript or in any object-oriented programming languages. We can continuously call them, as long as the previous one returns a proper object type. You can chain them. That's called call chaining. Some people call this as Fluent API. Whatever they want to call. You can call whatever you want, as long as it returns some object upon which you can call this. So dot on click, and then click is you can pass a lambda function, also called as the arrow function, and all that I'm doing is I'm calling my helper method called update and show date picker. And here what I'm doing is I am calling the date pickers update method with the selected value, that is the selected whatever is bound to the to this control, and this dot value will be bound from my view, which will be pointing to the view model property that is going to be coming from the contact class. So you call the update method. This update method is going to bring the calendar month that contains the date and the year. So it brings the correct year and the correct month, and then it will take you to the date which you are trying to bind to. If you don't call this update method, it is very odd. The very first binding worked, and then when you navigate away from to the next context, it was still holding to the old value. So I don't want to waste time on that. So I just added this helper method, and I stopped the show on focus, and I explicitly call the update, and then I call the show method because it's not going to be automatically shown. Since I said show on focus equals false, I had to explicitly show that. So that's the cool thing about this helper method. And I'm calling that same helper method when the user changes the date, because these are all custom events created by the Bootstrap date picker using the jQuery plugin and jQuery event custom events. And when the user changes the date, what I am doing here is I'm binding the value by converting the string value using the moment constructor, and then I'm formatting it and then passing it back as a date into this value. So that's pretty much it. So this is the view model side of it. Okay, so now let's go to the view. In the view, what we do is we put a div and then we create an input element because it's going to be a text box. But then we just bind the value to the value property, which is going to come from the actual caller view model, which is going to be my contact detail view model. And then we are just saying data dash provide is this anything that is data dash is completely control. The HTML parser will simply ignore it, and then whichever third-party library, in this case the Bootstrap date picker, that might have some value for that. Bootstrap always uses the data dash attributes, and it associates some behaviors. It takes a value and does something fancy with that. So in this case, it's going to treat this as a date picker by using this class date picker, and also this data dash provider is also being used by Bootstrap internally. Then here's the interesting stuff. What I did was I wanted to add a small button at the end, like with an icon, kind of like a calendar icon. It doesn't look like a calendar icon, but it's some icon that shows that it's a button. And then when you click on that button, it'll bring the calendar control as well. Either you can click inside the input text box, or you could click on that button. And if you want to change the glyph icon, you're welcome to change. You can go to the Bootstrap, look at the list of glyph icons, and if you find one that matches, that looks like a calendar, go for it. Okay, so that is our date picker component, which is what I just copy and pasted. I already explained each and every one of them. Okay, so now we created a date picker. As always, don't forget, we have to go ahead and add that into our global resources array. So elements slash date picker. If you remember, the reason why we are doing this is because this will allow us to use the date picker. For example, in the loading indicator in shell.html, we didn't have to do require from dot slash resources slash elements slash loading dash indicator, because when you register them as a global resources, you don't have to do the require from. That is a cool thing about the global resources. So I don't want to do a require from day elements slash date picker every time. So I am just going to add that into the global resources. Okay, so I'll save all. So all of the changes that I made will be saved. And then let us we'll actually wire this when we develop the detail contact detail view.